So I finally got the Atlantico, finally finished the Dockyard missions, and I have the newest Tier 8 Brawling secondary battleship. I of course love some of these Tier 8 Brawling battleships. The Massachusetts has in the past been my absolute favorite ship in the game. And I was excited to try out the Atlantico. This here, what you're seeing, is actually my very first game. I only have a 14-point commander, but it didn't seem to matter. We did extremely well. Notice, though, the matchmaker. Of course, we're going to do well against Tier 6s, and that kind of lies in the issue with this ship. It stomps all over Tier 6 games, and it's pretty tough to play into Tier 10 games. It doesn't have range, and, well, it doesn't have a lot of HP either, even though the armor is pretty good, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Notice the dispersion there? Not amazing, but we still managed to get a Citadel. Of course, with a full secondary build, probably not going to expect the best dispersion all the time, but the main guns are pretty good. They're 381 millimeters, and they hit pretty hard. They seem to have okay enough dispersion. Even though they're a little bit floaty, they do hit hard when they connect. And, well, you can see the secondaries just going to work here. The accuracy is extremely good, and when the larger caliber 234 millimeter secondaries hit, they do a ton of damage. They, of course, can pen well over 50 millimeters, so there's really not too many issues with the large caliber secondaries penning. And the smaller ones are pretty much just good for lighting fires. Although, here's a bit of the problem. No hydro, of course, so we're going to have to deal with the torpedoes coming from some of these destroyers. And that's where playing with a teammate who has hydro, or maybe a destroyer to scout for you, would be extremely beneficial. I think the biggest strength really is the amazing concealment. Realistically, a secondary battleship with the secondary range basically matching its standard concealment range is kind of nuts, and seems like the new template for battleships that are secondary focused. Seems like that's what Wargaming wants to go for. The German battlecruiser line certainly keeps this true. I think that it might be a little bit unfun to fight against, right? As someone who just spots this ship, instantly you're getting targeted by the secondaries. There's really no leeway there. It's not quite as bad as something like the Petro, where you spot the ship and it instantly is able to radar you, but it's a little odd to me that there's no area to play in where you can keep the ship spotted while also not taking secondary fire. But the secondaries aren't too useful. I think that overall secondaries are a bit of a gimmick in this game, but the Atlantico ones are surprisingly powerful, mainly due to their pen. These high caliber, very accurate secondaries hit quite hard, and we're going to do a ton of secondary damage in this game. Of course, it relies on you getting in range, and that's where I think this ship is extremely good against Tier 6 and not so great against Tier 10, like I said. It's all about getting value out of these secondaries, and in Tier 10 games, well, even the 12.5 kilometer range secondaries at Tier 10 aren't quite enough to be useful at that tier, so you're going to be struggling into Tier 10 games. At least I have been so far. We'll take a look at one of those examples after this game, but just know they don't all look like this one. This one went extremely well, mostly because we got the perfect matchmaker. Also, we had some excellent help from our LeFantasque here, and he's going to be one of the major contributors to helping us carry out this game. We do get a little lucky here that the Kagero doesn't drop very good spreads here, and the accuracy, again, it's pretty good. The AP doesn't do the most alpha damage. It's even less than 11,000 damage per shell, assuming you get a Citadel, so not the best alpha, but the guns hit hard enough. I didn't really notice them to be lacking. Something like a Odin, for example, really difficult guns to use because they don't feel like they hit very hard. The Bismarck and Tirpitz is a little along that line as well, whereas these guns, yeah, we get a little lucky to get a Citadel in there, but they seem to be hitting pretty hard against these broadside ships, and so far it seems like I can reasonably trust these guns, as much as I can trust a secondary build battleship's main guns. Overall, I do think the Atlantico is worth it if you're someone who really enjoys the brawling secondary battleship playstyle, if you're someone who loves the Massachusetts, Tirpitz, Bismarck kind of thing at Tier 8, and you know about the downsides. Those ships all have the same weakness of Tier 10 matches being a massive struggle. I think this ship is very much worth getting. Unfortunately, you got to start over with a whole brand new captain. Again, I only have a 14-pointer here, but I'll go over what I had later on in this video, but it's a pretty strong ship, and I've had a lot of fun playing it when I get this right matchmaker. A Sinop is a difficult target for anyone to deal with, but the Atlantico seems to do some decent damage into it here. Of course, we do overmatch his bow and his deck armor, so get a nice 10k salvo in there. And the next one is actually going to be even a little bit better. But as we're approaching the end of this game, we're getting up to 170k damage already. Confederate high caliber, that is a good game no matter which ship I'm playing. Of course, I did end up playing a few games in Massachusetts and Tirpitz, trying out a few of the other tier 8 secondary battleships. And I gotta say, the armor on this ship feels really, really good. There's very little superstructure here to deal with, so assuming you're able to stay angled, the ship is tough to deal damage to. It has more than enough bow armor, 32mm, to bounce most shells at this tier, and there's plenty of 150 or so millimeter upper belt armor and some deck armor that is more than enough to shatter a lot of HE. So I had a great time playing this ship so far. I have to play it a little bit more before I give you more of a full detailed review, of course. This is just a first impressions thing, but yeah, the LaFantascanide carrying this one out, it was a really solid flank by both of us here. And notice here with the secondary damage, 48k secondary damage from 109 hits. Those large caliber secondaries do a ton. Of course, no HE on this ship, so all those fires did come from the secondaries as well. So a really good result from the secondaries. I guarantee the Massachusetts, even the Tirpitz and Brandenburg, for example, those ships are not going to get anywhere close to that for secondary damage. They focus much more on smaller caliber guns that don't hit quite as hard and have as much pen. There you can see if you get good enough dispersion, you can absolutely crush some of these cruisers, but this game quickly fell out of our control. And yeah, our team's got some pretty poor positioning. Tier 10 games are tough. We take a massive chunk from that Yoshino there, as you can see. We've been chunking them pretty good, but yeah, tier 10 games are very, very challenging in this ship. So I don't want to show just the insane 200k first game I got. Of course, that is not representative of all the matches that I've played. It's much more like this, where I'm trying to face off against a broadside battleship, and the accuracy is just not there. So I did get a little bit lucky in that first game. Don't get me wrong, this ship is not an absolute beast of main guns and secondaries, impossible to spot, impossible to take down because the armor is so good. It is certainly not that. I just happen to have a really good first game. So I think this ship is worth getting though, but it all depends on if you are okay with this mid to high tier secondary battleship playstyle that really struggles as soon as you're up tiered. Overall though, I have had a lot of fun with Atlantico, and I definitely am going to be playing it some more, but whether it takes over from the Massachusetts as being my favorite tier 8, I doubt it. I think Massachusetts is just a little bit more consistent. I'm just much more used to playing it. I've played, I think, well over 400 games or something in that ship already, so it's a very comfortable ship for me. It's going to take a lot more than that to be comfortable in the Atlantico like I am. And honestly, I haven't really been playing secondary battleships all that much anymore because they're not as good as they once were. I think the meta has shifted to be one where you push in and you lose, and it's very difficult to get games where pushing in is the right option, especially early on, and impacting the early game is the best way to win matches. So relying on a ship that is only good in those close late games where you're taking more one-on-ones maybe is not the best way to have fun in World of Warships. Makes me feel a little bit useless in games like this, where I'm not all that impactful, and the best I can possibly do is YOLO in and try and trade out an enemy ship. So I think the Atlantico is a pretty solid dockyard ship, honestly. It's not overpowered, but I do think it's fun to play, and it's definitely different than the other tier 8 secondary battleships. As for this game, though, yeah, we definitely lost this one real quick. I got up to 76k damage, though, which is decent. But, yeah, the team score, yeah, that's not what you want to see. As for the build that I've started on the Atlantico, only 14 points, but I did go with concealment and the secondaries to start off with. That's probably why I died a little bit quicker in some of those games like you saw. I didn't have fire prevention yet. I definitely want to get that skill eventually, but the concealment plus the secondary range, right? 11.3 kilometer range on the secondaries with 11.5 kilometer concealment. That's very powerful, especially on a ship that has these insane 234 millimeter secondaries. 10-second reload. They do nearly 4K alpha. Of course, you're not getting that every time you pen. You get 33% of that or so. But 21% fire chance and 59 millimeters a pen. If they hit, they're going to be doing some serious damage, like we saw. As for the equipment, I'm again going concealment. I'm trying to tank as much as I can with some of these upgrades, since those fires hurt. They last a long time and they do a lot of damage. Secondary battery mod, definitely, I think you got to go with secondaries on this ship, since there's so many of them. Look at how big they are too, right? There's just so many of them on each side. It's pretty fun. But again, the armor really is pretty good here. As you can see, we're going to be bouncing all but the highest caliber 460 and above. And, well, there's enough to shatter a lot of HE here as well. And especially if you're angled, that's not much superstructure to hit. And that's really one of the downsides a lot of these secondary battleships have is, well, they have a humongous superstructure. Just look at the Tirpitz, for example. That's way, way more superstructure. Even though Tirpitz has excellent hull armor, you get farmed out through the superstructure. So the Atlantico having this relatively small superstructure is a massive advantage. It's a good ship, but I don't know if it's worth whaling all your way through if you haven't completed a lot of the missions yet. But if you have 1 or 2 missions left and it's a couple thousand doubloons, less than 5,000 for sure, I think I'd do it. It's a pretty interesting ship, but we'll see as I play more in this ship. Maybe my opinion will change. But let me know what you think of the Atlantico in the comments down below if you've got it. That'll definitely be interesting to hear your guys' opinions down there. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.